right, we rolling?
Whenever you are.
All right, as we say in show, I'm in the motion picture business also. Roll camera. Okay, you ready?
You're going to go first.
All right, yeah. I have a couple of opening comments to make dealing with this process. Ron approached me several times over the last few years about it. I thought it was interesting, but I don't know, it wasn't something I was really crazy about. So as we talked this year about it, I mentioned it to my kids. They said, Dad, you must do it. It is something that's so important to our family. In fact, all the kids said their kids have asked them, their parents, from time to time about my life, what I did, what I accomplished, etc. So obviously after hearing that, and we're very family-oriented in my family. After hearing that, I said, by all means, I'm going to do it. And I mentioned it to Ron, and I said, yes, this is something I want to do. So that is why we're here today. So just getting started, I thought about just some opening remarks I want to make. I believe that I'm the luckiest guy in the world. Now, some people say you make your own luck, and it may be so. But I happen to be a believer in luck also, because I've been married to a wonderful woman for 57 years, and we've been partners in everything we do. We've traveled, we've done everything. I have 3 wonderful kids and 5 wonderful grandchildren. Fortunately, all of us have very good health. We've had no sicknesses or any serious consequences in anything thus far. So that's part of my luck story. Also, my father set a very high bar for family, the meaning of family, and how important that is for everyone. My sister and her family, my brother and his family, all have endorsed the family concept, and consequently, all of our families are fairly close, and we all know how important maintaining family relationships are. So with that, that's my opening statement, and I'm prepared to move forward with whatever story my good friend Ron wants to drag out of me.
Okay. He's very good.
Whenever you're ready.
All right.
Okay. Today is October 17th, 2018, and we're here in Chicago in the Pearl's apartment, and 1040 Lakeshore Drive. So let's start out. What's your full name?
Melvin Edward Pearl.
And you were born when?
February 25th, 1936,
Where?
in Chicago, Illinois.
You know what hospital?
I forget.
Okay.
I did remember at one time.
Did your parents, where were you in the family constellation?
First, let me say, my parents are both European born. I'm a first generation American. I am the oldest of 3 children. I have a younger sister, 2 years younger, and a younger brother, 5 years younger. I could start with the very beginnings of, like I say, my parents were immigrants. My father came over about age 10 or 12 from the Ukraine.
And where in the Ukraine?
Odessa.
And he was how old?
About 9, 10, 11 years old. My mother came over a little bit.
Let's stay with your father.
Sure.
Okay. What did he tell you about coming over?
Not very much. He didn't remember a whole lot. They came in, his father came in first, which I guess was not unusual for Europeans. The father came in first, then went back and took his wife and 2 of his children. He had 4 children. 2 of his children to America. They came in through Canada, not through New York. The family first settled in Winnipeg, And to this day, I think I still have relatives in Winnipeg. I'm not sure, but at one time we visited him. And then he brought, like I say, he brought his wife and children over.
What was his name?
My father's name?
No, your grandfather's name.
I'm named after my grandfather. I can't recall.
You don't remember his name?
No, I knew it at one time. I can't recall. It began with an M, like Mordecai or something like that.
Did you know him?
No. He died shortly after I was born.
Did your father ever talk about him?
Not really. Not much. He, other than the fact that when they came over, he was a peddler. He had a horse and wagon, and he sold cibula piccola, which means onions and pickles. And my father worked on the wagon with him in his early years.
This was in Winnipeg,
No, in Chicago.
in Chicago. But did they ever talk about the circumstances under why they came to Chicago?
No. I don't even know why they picked Chicago, because I don't believe there was any family here at the time. Maybe it was just a convenient place to go.
And your grandmother?
My grandmother was an old world Russian,
What was her name?
Anna. And their name in Russia was Perpleichik, and they shortened it to Pearl. In fact, on the doorbell, where we lived on the west side, which I'll get into shortly, the name on the doorbell was Pearl, and underneath Perpleichik. How she spelled it, I don't know.
What were the circumstances under her coming to the United States? So your grandfather went over and brought them
Brought her
back?
back, yeah.
Did they ever talk about how they met?
No, I never knew.
Do you know anything about
About their life there?
or her family?
None, nothing. It was, as a kid, I don't know, as I got older and I would have asked those questions, she had passed. So she died when I was about 13.
What's your fondest memory of your grandmother?
This grandmother, we're talking my father's mother.
Yes.
This is a fabulous piece of business. When I was, well, first of all, we lived on the west side of Chicago, which was like a European ghetto. It was all immigrants. My grandmother lived in this country 40, 50 years, never spoke English because she didn't have to. Everybody in the neighborhood spoke Yiddish. All the stores spoke Yiddish. All the neighbors spoke Yiddish. And the kids, my generation, all were first-generation Americans. When I was in 8th grade, my parents, I might add, the whole area where we lived was virtually all Jewish, even though surrounded by Italians and Irish and whatever. But it was all 3-story walk-up tenement-type buildings with 1 million kids. You'd go out and go down into the foyer of the building on a rainy day, there'd be 40 kids in the foyer. We played ball on the streets. There were just 1 million kids around all the time. However, when I was going into 8th grade, my folks moved to West Rogers Park, because then the flow of immigrants from the west side started to move north to Albany Park, Rogers Park, West Rogers Park. But I wanted to finish 8th grade. So I lived with my grandmother, because she lived in the same building. I lived with my grandmother for 1 year.
Just the two of you?
No, she had a daughter, an unmarried daughter, my Aunt Betty. She lived there, and she had a son, but that was afterwards. He came later. But there was 3 of us in the apartment, my grandmother, my aunt, and myself. And obviously I had to understand Yiddish, and I started to speak it, but I've never really was able to speak it well, but I knew words and phrases to get along. And she was an Orthodox Jew, and I remember as a kid, I'd be on the street playing ball, and she'd open the window, and yell out in Yiddish for me to come up and turn on the gas on the Sabbath, because she couldn't turn on the gas. So I lived with them for a year, and on the weekends, I would get on the Crawford Street streetcar, and which ended on Peterson Avenue. My mother and father would pick me up at the end and take me to the house. Now I finally move in the house after I graduate grade school. And I get there, West Rogers Park, on our street, Estes. There were 2 houses. I look out the window. There's no kids, no houses, no nothing. I said to my folks, did you move me to Mars? What is this? I can't live like this. And it was a tough...
I can imagine. We're going to get to that. But let's go back to your grandmother.
Okay.
Okay. Did she have an influence on you and who you became?
Not this grandmother. The other grandmother I did. My mother's mother.
But this grandmother...
No, because she couldn't speak English, and but in any event, she couldn't speak English. So consequently, my discussions with her were very limited because I couldn't speak Yiddish very much. I understood what she was saying, and to this day, I probably could understand some Yiddish, but not much.
Was she a good cook?
No.
No?
Terrible. I mean, you know, she made these old European dishes. Everything was boiled to death. It was terrible.
Did she have a sense of humor?
I don't know.
You don't know because you couldn't tell.
No, she didn't speak English. But it was fine because I lived in the neighborhood where I had 10 million friends, and we were filled with kids on the street all the time. And that's why moving to West Rogers Park was so traumatic for me because it was like moving to Europe, to Mars.
So let's go back.
Whenever you are ready.
So what was your grandmother's name?
My father's mother,
Yeah,
Anna.
Anna. And was she attractive? What?
She was a little old Russian lady.
She was.
She seemed like she was 100 years old from the very beginning, and acted like she was still in Russia. And she didn't have to do otherwise because all of her contemporaries were all of European immigrants.
During the day, she just stayed in the house? Did she have friends? What?
I can't tell you much about her. I know I went to the store with her once in a while. The grocery store, there was a dry goods store. They called them dry goods stores in those days. And she'd speak Yiddish to the people there. So I really didn't, it's not fruitful to get into that with her because I don't know much about her.
How about your mother's parents?
My mother's mother was really part of our family. She was from Poland, from Warsaw. And
Her name was?
Pardon?
What was her name?
Pearl. That's what was interesting. My father's last name was Pearl, so she thought my mother would be Pearl.
Oh, okay.
But her name was Pearl Brussman, and she had 4 kids, all in Chicago. And she was a factor she came to our house a lot, and she was a typical, absolute stereotypical Jewish grandmother. And we used to tease her a lot. She had a great sense of humor, spoke English pretty good with a deep, Polish accent. Spoke to us in Yiddish and in English. But she was influential. She was a very good person and had high values, and you just felt her presence all the time.
Do you remember a moment or moments that she affected your life, or your character, who you became?
I can't give you a specific, but she was a factor in our whole family because, like I say, she had a great sense of right and wrong. And that kind of imbued all of our family. But as a typical Jewish grandmother, she used to say, I'm not lucky because Mrs. So-and-so, her son took her to Florida, and you didn't take me to Florida. And then at night, I'll never forget this. It was a cold winter's night. She lived in Albany Park. And we used to call her Bubby. Bubby, I'll drive you home. No, it's okay. I'll take 4 buses. I'll stand on the corner. She used to do that. So, no, we're going to take you home. But she had that typical Jewish guilt kind of thing.
So she didn't live on the west side?
No.
She never lived on the west side?
She didn't. She lived, let me withdraw that. No, she did. She lived on Roosevelt in Albany. And I used to, and her whole building were all of her landsmen from Poland. And I was the first grandchild. And she used to take me floor by floor to all her old cronies to show off her grandson. I remember that like it was yesterday.
So, and then she moved to Albany Park.
Yeah.
Did she move because of your parents?
No, it was the neighborhoods were changing, and all the Jews were leaving the West Side.
Just talk a little bit about, not in real depth, why the Jews left the West Side.
The blacks were starting to move in, and originally the Jews were where my father and mother grew up. Were on Taylor Street and in that area, the near West Side. Then they moved further west to Lawndale, where I grew up. And then in about the 50s and 60s, the black population started to move to the west side of Chicago, and the Jews all fled. They went north, to, like I say, to Albany Park, to Rogers Park, etc. But it was part of the migration, the black migrations from the south into Chicago, and then they started moving west, and that's when the Jews fled.
As a child, were you aware of this migration?
Not really. Because when we left Lawndale, as I said, my folks left when I was in beginning 8th grade. I left when I graduated. But it didn't happen then. It was starting. It was just an indication that the area was going to turn black.
What year did they move out of the west side?
49.
1949. So growing up on the west side, it was during the war. Do you remember anything about that?
Very much so. I remember going to the drugstore on the corner to buy a paper. And during the war years, every day the headlines were filled with war stories. Allies invade Iwo Jima, Allies invade Belgium, etc. The war ended in 45, and I remember as a kid, I used to think to myself, what in the hell are the newspapers going to cover now? There's no more news. The war is over. They have nothing more to write. And I was really questioning whether or not the newspapers would exist anymore. I remember that so clearly. But
how about your mother's father?
My mother's father, he died. I knew him.
His name was, you remember what his name was?
His name was Morris. And he had a shoe store on Maxwell Street. And I used to work there as a kid, cleaning boxes or doing whatever. They gave me busy work to do. Brusman Shoes. And sometimes we drive past there, and some of those buildings are still there. And I of course, the store isn't there, but I remember where it was. But he died when I was about 10 or 11. But he was a nice old man. I remember him coming in and telling me stories. He used to make up stories and to tell me about kids. I don't even know what the hell they were, but I remember I used to really look forward to him coming over.
Did he have a sense of humor?
It's hard to know. I was too young. I would think so.
But you had a good relationship with him.
Wonderful. But I didn't know him that well. He died, I was 10 years old or whatever.
Do you remember when he died?
Roughly, but it,
It wasn't.
no, it didn't impact. As I recall now, I didn't have any impact about it.
Let's talk about your parents. Let's talk about your mother first.
My mother was a
Her
wonderful.
name was?
Pardon?
Her name was?
Her name was Helen Brusman Pearl.
Pearl. Okay.
In fact, nowadays sometimes you get a credit card. What was your mother's maiden name? I have to stop for a minute. Brusman. She was a very nourishing woman. Raised 3 kids. And had a great sense of right and wrong, and instilled that in all of her 3 kids. And we had a very good, wonderful relationship. And then, I may be jumping ahead a little bit, she had, when we moved, I'll get to that later, because it had to do with my mother, because she had an operation and this is much later, and was in pain all the time. And it was a terrible thing. The wonderful, warm, fun woman was in pain a lot and just couldn't participate.
What impact do you think she had on your life and your character?
A lot. Like I say, she really knew the difference between right and wrong, and how to be a good person. She was a very good person, a caring person for everybody. And I think that stuck with me all my life.
You remember any specific example that you can?
No, I can't. I really don't.
Who she was.
But I just said it was a great family environment, and she created that environment.
Did she graduate from high school?
Yes. And she says, and she worked at J.C. Penney at a big, I guess they were in Chicago at the time. And she used to always tell us she was the secretary to the president of J.C. Penney. She made it all up, but she worked there as a secretary. But she used to tell me how important a job she had there. And we used to laugh.
And your father?
My father was my father, like I said, was a very strong advocate of family, and that set the bar for all of us. And he was wonderful. He was a wonderful man. He didn't spend it. He was working. He and his brother were in the real estate business, and like every father, probably like yourself and me. My kids are growing up. I was building a law firm. I was gone half the time. They keep joking to this day. So you didn't even know who my kids, they used to say, to this day, you didn't even know who we were till we were about 14 years old, they always say, because you were always gone, because I traveled all over the world doing business. But he took us to ball games. I remember, excuse me, I remember going to Cub games with him, and we had a lot of fun together. And he played ball in the backyard with us. But in later years, and this is not unique to me, the relationship between a father and son changes, where the son becomes more of the parent to the father because he's getting old, I was prospering, and he'd come to me for everything. It hasn't happened yet in my life with my kids because I'm still functioning well. But he relied on me a great deal in later years.
Okay, let's talk about that. He graduated from high school?
No.
He did.
He quit school at about 5th or 6th grade. So he had to work with his father on the horse and wagon. He's really self-educated. He used to read Time magazine religiously, and that really kind of educated him. And we used to kind of tease him about it, that's how he got his education, which is really true. He was a voracious reader, but had no formal schooling other than 6th grade or whatever the hell it was. But he knew education was of critical importance, like every Jew in the world. And I was the first in our family to go to college. And that was unheard of in his generation. Nobody went to college.
Did your parents ever talk about how they met?
Pardon?
How did they meet, your parents?
I don't know the answer to that. That's a very good question, and I don't know if I ever asked them that. I do have a picture that we'll put in of a wedding with my mother's and father's family. Not my father's family; they were all gone. But my mother's family, in a wedding taking place. I don't know if it's my mother and father's wedding. I've got it in here. Sometime in the 1920, 25, some in that era.
How would you describe their marriage?
Very good. I mean, like every marriage, you know. My mother never raised her voice, and nor did he, virtually. I'm sure they had their argument, but always behind closed doors, never in front of the kids. I don't remember them arguing in front of us ever. So it was a wonderful household. It was a joyous household. Everybody got along, and we were very fortunate.
So you have a brother and you have a sister, and you're the oldest. Do you remember when they were born?
I remember when my brother was born, because I was only 2 years old, but my sister was 2 years younger. And I remember a lot about the three of us growing up together. We would always, my brother and I, as he got to be 5, 6, whatever, we would always torment our sister, which probably every family does. I watched it in my family also. But it was good. We all got along very well. And we're probably, this sounds strange, we're probably closer now than we were growing up, because our families are very close.
What are their names?
Myrna Bartelstein, she was married to Gordy Bartelstein, who just died, and Kenny Pearl. He's got a wife and 3 kids, and Myrna's got 4 kids.
And when you were kids in your family, do you remember any family outings, things that you did
Yes,
with the family?
absolutely. We did. Every summer, my parents would rent a cottage in Union Pier, Michigan. And I remember as kids, we would load up a trailer, and crazy enough, my father would let us ride in the back in the trailer. An open trailer. Could have been killed. There was no highways then, you know. This is back in the 40s. And we went to Union Pier for the summer, and my father would come for weekends. And they had a wonderful beach, and I remember the path going down to the beach. It was a terrific, terrific growing up time.
We're going to stop.
Okay, whenever you are.
All right,
Okay.
action.
So let's go back to the West Side as you're growing up as a kid. Who were your friends? Do you remember?
A couple of them I haven't seen them now in 30 years. A couple of them they were all great kids. I mean, we had a fabulous, growing up on the West Side, it was one of the great growing up periods any kid could have. It was just as you see in the movies and all of them are first generation Americans. All their parents were immigrants. And there were a ton of them. It's all tenement buildings, 3-story walk-ups. Kids are on the street all the time.
Did you play sports?
All day long. All day long. We played a lot of sports right on the street, because we had one park not far from us, Franklin Park. But for some reason, we congregated more on the streets and the street corner. And then the older guys who were in high school, we were in grade school. I mean, we all looked up to them. And there were a lot of very good athletes that came out of that played college ball, etc. But it was great growing up.
Were you a good athlete?
Pardon?
Were you a good athlete?
I'm pretty good. I played In high school, I played baseball and basketball. In college, I played baseball for 1 year, but I wasn't good enough to make a career of
Who was your best friend?
it. On the west side, Artie Worth and Howie Ross.
Oh,
Look how I remember those names. Amazing. I haven't seen either of them. I did stay in contact with both of them for a number of years thereafter. In fact, Artie Worth was a tenant in one of my brother's buildings. So I would see him, we'd all go out to lunch. But the rest of them I've never seen again.
so when you went to school, you know, kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade, what kind of student were you?
I was always a good student. I don't know how I tested amongst the group of people, but I was always a good. I never had, I never had problems in school.
Did you like to read?
Yeah, but I only learned really to like it in later years. I did what they told me to do. But it was a terrific. The school playground, which was, you walked to school then. There's no such thing as school buses. You walked to school. It was about 6-8 blocks away with crossing guards, and I was a crossing guard later on. And we crossed a couple of big streets, and then we had a big playground at the school, and we played sports at the school all the time too.
What was your favorite subject? Did you have one?
In grade school?
Yeah.
Probably not.
Not?
No. Later on I did, but not in grade school.
All right, so before we go to Rogers Park, so let's talk a little bit about your relationship with your sister and your brother.
Again, my sister is 2 years younger, and my brother is 6.5 years younger, I can't recall. I can't really answer that because there was so little, it wasn't much of a thing. Later on, it developed. But on the west side, they were babies, so it wasn't relevant.
Did they have when you moved, and we'll get to the move, did they have a different relationship with your parents than you had?
No.
It was all the same.
I was older, so consequently, I could relate more to what they were about than, because my brother, I think, was just an infant, maybe a year old or something, and my sister was 4 or 5 or 6, whatever. So it wasn't relevant.
So that must have been pretty traumatic for you to uproot yourself, and I mean, the fact that you lived with your grandmother for a year, that must have been some discussion with your parents. Do you remember?
Well, I remembered that I wanted to complete 8th grade and graduate from school on the west side. But yes, it's traumatic. It was very traumatic. I mean, the whole idea of my parents not being there, even though I had a good relationship with my grandmother, but like I say, she was old world, and it was hard to have any relationship, if you will. And my brother and sister were, of course, in West Rogers Park at the time.
What happened to your relationship with your grandmother when you moved to Rogers Park?
I can't really recall. I think she passed shortly thereafter. She was, as I indicated earlier, she was an old woman, probably at age 20, but not unlike the rest of the European women. They grew old quickly. To me, she was ancient from day one.
So, when you moved, you didn't miss her?
No, it wasn't. I'm sure we visited her from time to time back on the west side, but it wasn't one of those relationships where I would have been really upset leaving her.
So now you get to Rogers Park.
Okay.
Let's talk about that. What was going on inside you?
Oh, please. It was like moving to Mars. I came from a virtual ghetto with 9,000 kids on the street. West Rogers Park was just being developed at that time. It was 80% prairies. I'd look out the window and see nothing but prairie. There was 2 houses on our street. No kids. occasionally I'd see a kid on the street. I got to meet 2 or 3 kids, and that's all there were, as opposed to 400 on the street where I came from. And I was terribly resentful that my parents did this to me. They took me out of my life on the west side and brought me to Nowheresville, West Rogers Park. That was a very tough time initially.
Did you act out? I mean,
No, not really. Something happened, and I'll just start the story and we'll get into it later. I looked out the window one day. I'm now a freshman or sophomore in high school. I look out our kitchen window. I remember this like it was yesterday. There was no houses except for one house about half a block down. I look out the window, and there's a horse grazing in the backyard of that house. The only horse I'd ever seen was with a wagon. So I go over there, and there's a kid a year older than me. I meet him, and he shows me the horse. I touch the horse. I've never seen a horse like this before. Just so happened, there was a stable on the corner of McCormick and Toohey, which was walkable from my house. And he used to take the horse from the stable and take him to his backyard to eat the grass. And then later on in the day, when I got to know him, I would walk with him, holding the halter of the horse, and take the horse back to the stable. It was called Stardust Stables on the corner of McCormick and Toohey. And that was the beginning of a whole different life for me.
And we'll get in. Did you become friends with this?
Very close friend.
What was his name?
Howard Field.
Okay.
I haven't seen him after college. We see each other in college once in a while. But I've never seen him since.
All right, we're going to come back to the horse, but
Okay.
now you matriculate at Evanston High School, right?
Pardon?
9th grade, you start Evanston High School.
Evanston Township High School. Why did I go to Evanston Township? Because I was in the Senn High School district in Chicago. We lived just south of Howard Street, okay, which is the dividing line. There were 2 other kids I knew on the street. Ronnie Gaiman, who I'm friendly with to this day, and Phil Pines, who I haven't seen in many years. They, for whatever reason, their parents sent them to, and we were all the same age, Evanston Township High School. Well, I didn't know anybody, so I went to Evanston Township High School. It was a very traumatic time for me also.
Why?
Evanston at that time had no Jews. Now, bear in mind, I'm coming from a virtual ghetto. It was the first time I ran into anti-Semitism at Evanston Township High School. They'd make negative comments about Jews. The kids, the freshmen, they'd make Jewish slurs or whatever. I'd never heard of that. I came from an all-Jewish neighborhood. And that was very hurtful, and consequently, I didn't make many friends there. However, they had a fairly, I don't know how big size, black community in Evanston, and I got friendly with a number of black guys. They were pals of mine because they were running into the same issues I was running into. Mostly in high school, my friends were black. I had other friends there, but they were marginal friends, to be honest with you. So consequently, 4 years of high school, and I'll put the horse issue on the side for the moment.
We're going to get back.
The 4 years of high school were not fun years for me. They were adequate.
What did you make good grades? Your grades,
I was always a good student.
always.
Oh, yeah. I wasn't at the top of my class, but I was good.
Did you ever share these anti-Semitic incidents with your parents?
I think I did. And they weren't able to give me much counsel on it because they hadn't run into it themselves. So I didn't let it, I didn't let it take over my life, if you will. And I was not a crusader. I didn't know much about it. I mean, to me, it was so foreign because, where I came from. But I do remember that. That was maybe in my whole life, as I think back, that was the only time I personally ran into anti-Semitism.
Did they try to bully you?
No, not really. Just
Verbal.
slurs and whatever. Yeah, it was 4 years of high school itself were not a pleasant experience.
Were you involved in any clubs, any sports?
No, I couldn't wait. I played sports there. I was on the basketball team, and there was a couple of Greek guys. One guy's name, how can I remember this? Evie was his first name, Evie Kokalis. He was on my team, on the basketball team. He was a real nice guy. That's the only guy I even remember from high school. Strange I remember that name. But I played basketball, and I started to play baseball, but I only played 1 year in baseball.
Did you discover girls then?
Good question. The answer is no. Why? Because I was too busy with my horse. My father always used to say to me, "You're going to look mighty funny walking down the aisle with a horse when you get married." I don't think I had a date in high school. Clearly didn't go to the prom.
You didn't, and it didn't bother you.
Not at all, because I was so involved in this other life.
Let's go to the other life, the horse.
All right, it consumed my life.
Tell me how it developed.
Developed, as I indicated, with how...
You're now what, 14 years old?
Yes, 14, 15 years old. With Howard Field, when I found the horse, saw the horse in his backyard. And then I had never been on a horse, of course. So I used to go with him to the stables, and we'd go in the corral, and eventually I got on his horse. His horse was named Bunny. It was a spotted horse. And he taught me how to ride, and I'd ride around the corral. Little by little, I got more involved. I'd go every day to the stables. In fact, my mother would make me take my clothes off in the garage. I couldn't come in because I smelled from the horses. I got more involved, and then with Ronnie Gaiman and Howard Field, we met some older guys. They probably were 20s or whatever. And they bought a co-op barn, stable barn, about 12 stalls, 15 stalls, which was located, at that time I could drive, I was old enough to drive, where you pay a toll now coming out of O'Hare on the tri-state. That was all of our barn and our corral. And my father bought me a horse, and I got involved in horse shows and the rodeo. And I became a calf roper in the rodeo. And there's a picture I'm going to put in there that's sitting in my den now about me sitting on top of my calf roping horse.
What was your horse's name?
Skeeter.
Skeeter. I mean, there weren't a lot of Jewish kids that were
Jewish cowboy, my father used to call me. It was some of the most wonderful years of my life as I look back on it. On weekends, we would go to horse show rodeos and county shows in Sandwich, Illinois, for one. I don't even know where Sandwich is, but I remember the name. And little county fairs and whatever. At that time, they all had horse shows and rodeos. And we would load up our horses on Miley trailers, M-I-L-E-Y, Miley trailers. And we would trail down to wherever we were going. And that would, over the summer, be most of the weekends. So that was my life, was the horse.
You make any money doing that?
No,
you got
money.
trophies.
No, trophies, yeah. But it was, and these guys, these older guys, were like mentors for me. And they were wonderful people. And it was a great life. I loved every minute of it. And that's why when you ask about high school, dating, whatever, I was not part of the high school scene because I'd be tied up with the horses. And I don't regret a minute of it.
And it must have amazed your parents.
Oh, they never heard of such a thing. Like I tell you, my mother made me take, and I'd clean the stalls. We'd all clean our own stalls. With a pitchfork, we call mucking the stalls, taking all the manure out, putting fresh sawdust down on the stalls. And, I'd come home stinking. And my mother made me take my clothes off in the garage.
Did they ever come and watch you?
Yes, they did. And I remember my mother, the horse was in the corral. We put hay out in the corral for the horses to feed. And my mother had a carrot and called my horse over. I think we gave the carrot to my brother or sister. And they called the horse over. Sure enough, the horse came over and ate the carrot. They thought that was the greatest thing they'd ever seen.
So how long did this go on with the horses?
It stopped when I went to college. It was all 4 years of high school. I went to college, and I'm going to jump ahead for a minute because it ties into the horse. When I got married, I'm telling my wife the story of how I was a cowboy. She thought I was nuts. We lived in Milwaukee, and we went to the county fair. It was in Milwaukee at the time. They had a big rodeo. And we're sitting in the first row. And all of a sudden, about 5 cowboys on horses come up. Mel, how are you? Haven't seen you. And hugging and kissing. My wife is looking around. She can't believe it. She said, well, I guess the stories are right. You were a cowboy.
Well, when you went to college, you didn't miss it.
I did miss it, but I knew I had to kind of quit it cold turkey. Otherwise, it would destroy my college life because I'd be yearning for that. And I never got back with horses ever again. I mean, I've taken my kids riding once or twice. In fact, we were just talking about that, doing some kind of, with the grandchildren, taking them on the, we did this winter. We went somewhere outside of Santa Barbara, a lot of horse country there, and we rode up in the hills with the little ones.
You can still ride, huh?
Oh, it's like riding a bike, you don't forget.
So you're in high school, and you're really not involved, and you're a good student. Did you think at that time, what do I want to be when I grow up?
I probably didn't. I don't think I gave that a thought till mid-years in college. And then I wasn't sure.
So you're a senior in high school, you're not dating. Tell me the process that you went through to get to the University of Wisconsin.
I knew I wanted to stay in the Midwest. I wasn't very adventuresome at the time. As opposed to my kids or your kids, they go all over. There was another good friend of mine that lived in the neighborhood. I didn't go to high school with him. He and I were talking about colleges, and University of Wisconsin came up. I didn't want to go to Illinois for whatever reason. We went up there to visit, and it's a fabulous campus. And that was probably my entire thought process. And I know I'm jumping ahead, I had 4 years of college that were
We're going to get into
spectacular.
that, but did you remember discussing it with your parents? Were they for it?
Like I say, they never went to college, so they didn't know from college. Whatever you want to do is fine. So I elected to go to the University of Wisconsin, and it was a great, great decision.
So when you're in high school and you're involved with the horses, did you have any jobs to make money, or? Was it just
Yeah,
horses?
I had a summer job. I picked papers in the park with a stick and a bag. Picked garbage out. That was one summer. One summer I worked on a used car lot, and Lynn and I were just talking about that. And it was one of my father's friends was in the used car business on Cicero Avenue. And he was a 32nd degree Mason or something like that. So I had a study. He wanted me to become a Mason, ultimately a Shriner, which I never moved to the last category. But I remember studying this book all summer long, and I passed the exams, and I got the apron and all the business, which my wife threw out a number of years ago. I yelled at her the other day, how could you have thrown that stuff out? It's part of my history. But in the event, I remember that was a summer job I had. Picking up papers was another. I can't remember what else.
Where did Judaism come?
Yeah. Okay, ask that again.
Where did Judaism come to play in your life? You were bar mitzvahed where?
I was bar mitzvahed on the west side of Chicago. And I will tell you something that I tell my, because I'm having a grandson being bar mitzvah now. I gave my bar mitzvah speech, as every Jewish kid gives a speech at the end. I gave my speech in Yiddish. One of the few people in America that gave a speech in Yiddish, other than the Orthodox Jews. And I went to Hebrew school like every kid did and hated it. And you do it.
Were the Jewish holidays a big deal in your family?
Not a big deal, but an important deal. We obviously observed. I've been fasting since I'm 13 years old, as recently as 2 weeks ago or whatever it was. We'd go to temple, to shul. The shul I went to on the west side, this is before moving to West Riders Park, was like going to a shul in Europe. On the west side, they had a ton of small shuls, like in Europe, for each shtetl had their own shul. And I remember these old Jews with their beards, and the women were upstairs, of course. It's an Orthodox temple, a shul. And I used to sit there with my father, and some old Jewish guy with a long beard sat next to me. I don't know why. And they used to point. I used to have to follow. I do that with my kids. They don't pay attention to me. But I remember it very clearly.
Did your mother keep kosher?
No. My grandmother did, but not my mother.
But your mother never kept kosher?
Never.
So Judaism certainly was a part of your life, but it wasn't central.
It was more of a cultural thing, even my family today, more of a cultural thing than a religious thing. Mm-hmm. We're all very conscious we're Jewish. We live by Jewish tradition. No one is super religious. Probably my daughter, she's more active in her temple than my other kids were. But like I say, it was a cultural / traditional thing, and all the trappings of a Jewish tradition.
So now you get to the University of Wisconsin. But before we do that, I know you talked about your mother and always doing the right thing and your father. When you think about your character and who you are and who you became, how big of an effect did your parents influence you? How?
I think a great deal. I think from a morality standpoint of right and wrong and do unto others kind of thing, they were very conscious of that. And I think that molded my character, my personality, and hopefully my kids, etc. Because, and again, that's part of the Jewish culture and the Jewish tradition, going back hundreds of years. And that was very impactful for me.
Do you think they had, what were the expectations you think they had of you?
Again, in as much as I was the first person they even knew that went to college, I mean, it was, I'm sure, high. And we get into later things. I'll tell you about my law firm, my father and mother with my law firm, etc. But that was, it was very important to them, and it made them very proud.
So now you get to the University of Wisconsin. Did you know anybody when you got there before you got there?
The guy I went up with, Joel Glickman was his name, who I just saw not too long ago. I knew one or more, maybe two older guys at the Pi Lam fraternity, and they asked me to pledge that fraternity. I pledged that fraternity and made many, many wonderful friends that I'm friendly with to this day. I had 4 years at college were spectacular. I used to say to people it was like being at a resort for 4 years. I mean, I was a good student, but we played a lot. I mean, parties, and that's where I met girls. I never knew girls. Like I said, I never dated in high school. So I finally met some girls. I went out, and it was a different world for me. It just so happens our fraternity house was right on Lake Mendota. And we had a pier from our living room right down into the lake. And during the warm weather, it was a party there every day. And it was 4 wonderful years. And I had wonderful friends. And as recently as now, like this, as a matter of fact, it was supposed to be this weekend, my year in the fraternity, just my year, not the whole fraternity, is made up maybe 25, 30 guys, whatever. Obviously, several of them passed away. Were unusually successful, right? We had one guy who was a United States Senator. One guy was the commissioner of baseball. One guy owns the Oakland Athletics. One guy owns the Marcus Hotel chains around the world. On and on. Everybody was successful. I don't think there was a dud in the whole group. We had 2 or 3 years ago a reunion just of our group and a terrific turnout. Everybody who could make it made it. This weekend we were supposed to have our next reunion. It was just canceled about 6 days ago because too many guys couldn't get to, it was going to be in Chicago. Last time it was in Phoenix. They couldn't get here for whatever reason. Instead of 22, there were only 5 or 6 guys, so they canceled it. But they'll do it again next year. But it was an extraordinary group of guys.
We're going to get in, we're going to stop right now.
Hold on. All right, whenever you're ready.
So you're at the University of Wisconsin, and you discover girls. Did you have a girlfriend?
I had a lot of girlfriends. And one of the girls, I don't know, semi-serious, like 5 dates or whatever. But one girl who I actually run into, and she was actually a friend of my sister's, lived on the south side of Chicago, 79th and Ellis. I had never been south of Madison Street in Chicago. We came home for Easter vacation or whatever it was, and I had to go to her house, and I was living in West Rogers Park. It's the 79th and Ellis. It's like driving from here to Madagascar. And it was the first time I'd ever seen the south side. And she and I went out for a year or two, I think. And then my wife, Lynn, was at Madison. She's 2 years behind me. She was super popular. She went out with him. I never went out with her. I knew her. And she was a model, and she had a TV show in Madison.
Do you remember the first time you saw Lynn?
The first time, probably not. Maybe walking on the street. But she dated several guys in my fraternity. And then I used to see her on TV. Goodman Jewelers. She did some kind of interview show or whatever in Madison.
So there wasn't really any interest.
I was busy, she was busy. But, you know, we were friends.
Okay, we'll get to how that
Yeah.
progressed. So you're at the University of Wisconsin. Are you thinking about, what am I going to do to make a living?
I didn't give it a whole lot of thought. Like most college kids are not really sure what the hell they're about. So maybe about my second or third year, I said, you know, maybe I'll go to law school. My uncle was a lawyer, and I always had great respect for him. He never really practiced because he was in the real estate business with my dad. But I said, well, maybe I'll do that. Now, I knew one thing for certain. And I filed applications to law schools all over. And one of them was for the University of Wisconsin, University of Wisconsin Law School. And I knew one thing, I couldn't stay there because I'd never get serious. I mean, I did 4 years of college. It was a joke. I mean, I loved it, but I was, I partied too much. So I decided to go to Northwestern Law School, which was a very well-ranked law school in the history of law schools in the United States, as it is today. And I filed my application. I took the law boards, or whatever the hell they're called, and was admitted. And in 1957, I entered the freshman class at Northwestern University Law School.
Did you love law school?
I worked hard. My first year of law school is very frightening. I mean, because they teach what they call the Socratic method. In college, you ask a question, you get an answer. In law school, they don't give you answers. They give you theories. You got to develop your own thought process. But I did well enough to get on the law review. I was a law review student, and I wrote an article for the law review my second year dealing with due process and uniform code of military justice. I still remember it. But law school, I worked very hard my first year. Second year, I was more comfortable because I got the scheme of things. And the third year was very easy. So that was law school. But I worked hard.
What did you do during the summers?
In my law school years?
Yeah, when you were at Wisconsin.
I'm trying to think.
And,
I really don't recall. I swear to God, I don't recall what I did in the summers. I remember earlier years when we used to go to Union Pier, and then with the horses, I don't remember.
You came back, you were living with your parents?
Yes, they lived, and we drove down. We had a carpool, several guys in my area. We drove down every morning from West Rogers Park to Northwestern Law School. And I did that for 3 years.
But you really weren't, you didn't have a job, you weren't making any extra money?
I can't think, oh, no, I'm sorry. One summer, I went to San Francisco and clerked for a law firm, small law firm in San Francisco.
Wow.
And I fell in love with San Francisco. And when I got to the government, I'll tell you more about that. I don't want to jump ahead. But I always wanted to come back to San Francisco. That was one summer. Oh, I know. The other summer, we traveled, me and one of my pals, who I'm friendly with, as we had lunch with 2 days ago, we went to Europe. We rented a little car, a Peugeot, I'll never forget it. It was a little red thing about the size of this couch. And we were gone for 3 months about. And we toured Europe, and then we went to Israel. This is 1958, because it was the 10th year anniversary of the birth of Israel. And we parked our car somewhere in Italy, and we flew to Israel and stayed there for several weeks. And we got friendly with a guy that came back with us to the U.S., an Israeli kid. But that was a fabulous summer.
So your father must have been doing pretty well to be able to
Yes. Well, they were in the real estate business, like I said. They were doing very well. In the end, they had sold off a lot. My uncle controlled it. His family controlled 75%. My father had 25%. So in the end, it kind of dried up. And when we get to that, I'll describe the financial situations.
Okay.
But at that point in time, when going to Europe, and the old $5 a day Europe nonsense, I probably was that. Because me and my pal that traveled together, we had this little car.
It must have been a great summer.
Oh God, we talk about it to this day. It was fabulous.
So you come back, you're finishing law school.
Yes, sir.
Tell me what was going on in your
Well, I knew I got to study for the bar. And I met somebody who was a guy in Chicago. He was friendly with some relative of mine. I can't remember who. He was about 5 years older than me. And he worked for the office of the chief counsel of the Internal Revenue Service of the Treasury Department. And he's telling me about that. So I graduate law school, I pass the bar, and I filed for a position with Treasury. I'm accepted, and I go to Washington to live. But we missed an important part of my wife.
You know, I was
That's
just thinking
back.
about that.
I go to Washington. I'm working for the Chief Counsel of the Internal Revenue Service in the Legislative and Regulation Branch. And after I'm there a year, I put in for a transfer to San Francisco, to that office, because I wanted to go back to San Francisco. But,
Where did Lynn come into
all
the
right,
picture?
that's a good point. While I'm in law school here, Lynn is 2 years behind me in college. She graduates college, moves to Chicago. She's from West Virginia, Charleston, West Virginia, had no interest in going back to West Virginia. She had friends in Chicago from college, etc. When she moves back to Chicago, she's, again, had a TV show, I think, in Chicago, and was a model for department stores and whatever. And then we start dating. And we dated for a,
So,
yeah.
did you keep in touch with her when you?
I'll tell you how that happened. She was in college. I used to go back up to Madison some weekends for football games and see her then. She was a pal of one of my, she went out with one of my friends.
But
or
you
whatever.
weren't dating. You didn't date it.
No, still didn't date.
All right.
We didn't date till after she moved to Chicago. But we were friendly. And when she came to Chicago, she called me or I called her, or I ran into her, I don't recall. And then we started dating in Chicago.
Did you, when you started dating, did you say to yourself, she's the one?
I might have. And I remember bringing her home. My folks still lived in West Arches Park. And Friday night dinners at my house, like I say, was a cultural, traditional thing, not a religious thing. And I remember bringing her home for a Friday night dinner. And my mother had a big challah on the table. And Lynn said, "Can you pass me the Jewish bread, please?" My family went nuts. But that was her indoctrination into my family, and she became a very close part of my family, my mother and father and all of our family.
So how long after you started dating in Chicago did you get engaged?
Did I what?
That you got engaged? How long?
I was leaving for Washington. I'm trying to put this sequence together. We were not married, or not even engaged, because I know when I went to Washington, I lived with two pals from school. Both of them worked at Justice, and I worked at Treasury, across the street from one another. And then I had to deal with the service. I think I got engaged right at that time. She would come to Washington to visit, and I think I got engaged in Washington, or maybe right before I went to Washington.
Was there a moment where you said to yourself, this is who I want to spend my life with?
Yeah, while we were dating. And when I used to bring her home to West Rogers Park to the Friday night dinners, I mean, she fit in so easily, and it worked out so well. And then I think I visited, when we were engaged, I think I went to West Virginia and visited with her family once or twice. And they were very nice people. But
Tell me how you got engaged.
I can't recall.
You can't recall?
No.
You don't remember
I don't
asking
think
her
it
to
was
marry?
anything where I got down on one knee. I think, I'm just imagining this. I think we're in the car and we drove, and this is in Chicago, right before I went to Washington, I believe. And I think I parked the car, and she was sitting next to me, of course. And I think I proposed in the car. So it was nothing terribly dramatic.
Did you have a ring? You must have had a
I
ring.
think I did, yeah. I really don't recall, to be honest with you.
You think Lynn will remember?
Probably, I don't know. Probably not either.
So you get engaged, and where did you get married?
Well, before that,
Okay.
I'm in Washington. I'm going to tell you a story about this. This is an incredible story. During those years, they had a draft. It was a lottery. A number would come out. I was working for chief counsel, and I'm registered in Chicago with the draft board. My number is going to come up, and I go to the chief counsel himself, and I said, I'm working for the government. I assume I'm exempt from the draft. He said, no, you got to go. Now and I know my number's coming up within a month. Vietnam is just starting to happen then. I said, oh, God, I'm going to get drafted and who knows what. One of my pals at Justice said to me, he just found a spot at Lackland Air Force Base in some Air Force Reserve unit. He said, there may be a spot left. I get in my car, I zip out to Andrews, and sure enough, I got the last spot. Then within a month, we had to go to basic training or whatever the hell it's called in Lackland Air Force Base in Texas. And my stories in the military can fill a whole other chapter of the videography. But I was there, I was 26 years old. In my unit, there were all 18, 19-year-old kids from Tennessee and Alabama. I fit in perfectly there. And I had my office in Washington send me stuff just so I can keep up with the tax laws, whatever. And I'd get a big envelope once every couple of weeks. United States Treasury Department, Internal Revenue Service. So when these guys see the envelope, they figured I'm a spy because they were all...
Did they really?
Yeah, oh, God, it was horrible. But I had, my 6 months there, which was beyond horrible. And then I leave, I'm finished with the military, but I've got to be in a reserve unit. Oh, so I take the plane back. First, I go to Charleston because we got to plan the wedding. Because I got married right after I got out of service in Charleston. And I was 6'2" and weighed about 150 pounds because I couldn't eat the food there. I had a deal with some kid. I used to give him the channel line, give him my food, and he would polish my shoes and my brass. That was the deal we made. These were all hillbillies. So, in any event, I'm now get married, and Lynn and I moved back to Washington. I'm still in Washington.
Let's talk about the wedding.
Okay.
Remember the wedding?
Oh, very clearly.
Who was your best man?
Probably my brother. Lynn had a brother too, and he was part of the wedding party.
And your parents were there?
Oh, sure. Your parents were there. And it tickled me. A lot of my father's old Jewish friends come to Charleston, West Virginia for the wedding. They fit in perfectly. They'd never seen a place like this. They might as well have gone to Pakistan. And they'd walk down the street, 3 or 4 of them, and see. And Charleston is real country folk. And that was a big city already. But we had a big wedding at the Daniel Boone Hotel. And
Lynn's parents liked you.
Pardon?
Lynn's parents liked you.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I got
them.
along very well with all of them. And we had a terrific wedding. And in fact, I'm sure there's pictures of it somewhere. She'll have to help me with that. But then we went on our honeymoon, and we came back
Where'd you go on your honeymoon?
to Nassau. And my folks were in Florida. And for the weeks we were in Nassau or whatever, I remember coming back to Florida after our honeymoon. And then we moved back to Washington. Now I'm in a reserve unit for the Air Force. At that time, the radar units were mobile radar units. They were big vans behind a truck. And you opened up the lid, and there were literally millions of wires. The captain, or whatever the hell he was, says, "You're going to be trained to fix the wires in the radar unit." I said, "Oh, that sounds like a good idea." So I'm lamenting to Lynn about this job I have in the reserves. My father calls and says, "You know, we have a cousin," and this obviously comes from Winnipeg, we lived in Arlington, Virginia, right across the street from the Pentagon. "You have a cousin," or I have a cousin, his first cousin, that lives in Alexandria, Virginia, which is 10 miles down the road. "Here's their number, call." So I called the girl. She was very nice on the phone, invited Lynn and I to dinner at her house. We go to the house, and the husband's not there yet. She says, "Oh, he called. He'll be a few minutes late. He's coming from the Pentagon." He walks in the door. He's a 2-star general. Now, bear in mind, I had 1 stripe. I see a guy with 3 stripes, I panic. 2-star general, my heart just about jumps out of my chest. We sit down. He's a very nice gent. We're having a drink. "What is your job at the Pentagon?" I ask. He says, "I'm in charge of all reserve personnel." I said, "Thank you, Jesus. I just hit a grand slam home run." So I'm trying to be subtle. Does he get me out of this? I have a job in the reserve that probably doesn't fit my background well. Radar. He says, "Are you kidding? Come to my office Monday morning, the Pentagon. I'll bring you into the judge advocate, and you'll sign the papers. You don't have to do anything." And that's how I got out of the military.
Oh, my God.
A 1 in a million story.
Wow.
This guy turned out to be a 2-star general. Oh, God.
So, but you never, which question you want to ask?
Right here, when you were just following up.
Okay. So you never really got back to San Francisco.
That's a good question. I tell the chief counsel I want to transfer to San Francisco. He says, "As a matter of fact, there's going to be a regional council meeting of all the regional councils in Washington next week. When the guy comes in, his name, I still remember it, Mel Sears, was the regional counsel in the San Francisco office. I'll bring him to your office and you can chat with him." Fine. He comes to my office. I'm telling him how I'm dying to get back to San Francisco. He says, "Fine, we got an opening for you." Fine. I said, "Here's the thing. My wife and I are going to drive across country. We're going to take a week or two, make a vacation out of it. But do send me a file or so that I can get acquainted with what's going on there, and, and I can jump in full speed ahead." He sends me a file, and it's a criminal tax case. I had no interest in doing criminal tax work. I wanted to do civil tax work because I wanted ultimately to be a tax lawyer in private practice. So I go to the chief counsel and I say, "He's only got an opening there for criminal tax work." He said, "Well, go out there and you're going to take about 1 year to 2 years. You can ultimately get into the civil tax area." I said, "That's not going to work." I said, "What else do you have available?" He said, "We have an opening, but you couldn't go to your hometown." In my job, you could not be in the office in your hometown because it was a sensitive job. So he says, "We have an opening in Milwaukee." Now, that wasn't terribly exciting for me because even though my wife and I knew everybody in Milwaukee because we went to school in Madison, and everybody in Milwaukee goes to Madison. So I'll never forget it. We come home that night, we're packed, ready to go to San Francisco. I says, "Break out the scotch bottle. I got some news for you. We ain't going to San Francisco. We're going instead to Milwaukee." And we both sat there and cried. I'll never forget it. It was so disappointing. Turned out to be a great result for me, but it was a very traumatic experience.
So now you move to Milwaukee, and you're doing tax work for the government. And are you thinking in your mind, I'm going to do this forever, or I'm going to go into private practice?
Well, you had a commitment. When you worked for the Treasury, you had a 4-year commitment.
Okay.
You had to be there. If you broke the commitment,
Yeah, I got
you was held to pay. So we were there. We went to Milwaukee after a year and a half or 2 in Washington, and we stayed an extra 2 or 3, 4 years, whatever, in Milwaukee. And Milwaukee was great because we knew everybody. We had our first kids there, and all of our friends have their first kids there. And it was close to Chicago. We'd come in once a month or whatever. And it was a wonderful time. And to this day, we still talk to some of our friends from Milwaukee.
What was it like becoming a father?
Exciting. Our first son was born there. And we used to go, Alan Cole, from the Cole family, they had a big house on some lake west of Milwaukee. And every weekend, even in the cold weather, we'd go because he had a kid same age as our kid. And we used to go to the lake with the Cole family. It was wonderful. It was a wonderful time because most of our friends had kids at about the same time. So it was a wonderful community. And like I say, we're still friendly with many of them today.
Did you and Lynn ever talk about staying in Milwaukee and living there?
No. We knew it's a wonderful town, but it's a small town. Milwaukee is like being in the Jewish community is very tight-knit there. And I knew I wanted to come to Chicago eventually. And after my commitment expired and we stayed an extra year, I think, we then moved to Chicago. And I joined a small law firm in Chicago.
When you were in Milwaukee, and did you find the tax work interesting? Was this something that you loved?
Oh, yeah. I love being in government. I once said to my father, because I knew a lot of career government people, I said, maybe I'll make a career in the government. I love my job. And he said, well, you want to do that? That's okay, but your funds are going to be limited. And after Lynn and I talked about it, I decided it didn't make any sense. Even though my boss in Milwaukee, he had a nice little house in Wauwatosa, and he lived a nice life, but, very modest American story. And I knew that I wanted more than that. And then I quickly decided when my commitment was up, I was going to move to Chicago and go into the private practice.
Give me the insight. What did you love about the tax work for the government? What was it?
Well, I tried cases in the government. I had one of the things about government, which is unique, I would recommend it to a kid getting out of school today, is you immediately get into big time stuff that it would take years in private practice to reach that level. I was dealing in Milwaukee. In Washington, I was doing legislative work and regulation, so it's a different kind of an animal. But in Milwaukee, it's a law firm. It's a regional counsel firm, and you're dealing with all the law firms in Milwaukee. And I would and I'd have a case with the top tax lawyer at the biggest firm in Milwaukee, and I was his opposite number. Well, you could never do that in private practice. So that was a real high, and you grew up real quick. You became a professional real quick because you had to.
Did you sense then that you were really good?
Yeah, I knew my business. I knew how to solve problems, which I've trained my kids to. It's one of the great lessons I think people can learn anywhere, any place, to be a problem solver.
Did you have a mentor when you were up there?
Did I what?
Did you have a mentor?
Actually, I did. When I first started, a guy named Rex Guest, who ultimately, when he left government, he was a career government guy, but he left the government, he was probably 60 years old. I hired him at my law firm.
Wow.
And in my tax department, because we had a lot of tax cases in tax court, and he was an expert at it, and he worked for me for 10 years.
So you're in the government and you're going to come to Chicago. What are you going to do in Chicago?
I'm getting a job with a small firm called Gottlieb and Schwartz. It was a well-known Chicago law firm of about 20 lawyers going back 50 years. And I was there for, I don't know, 6, 7 years before I went on and did
So,
my own.
did you come to Chicago and interview? Did you know
Yes,
anybody?
yes. I don't know how I got to them or they got to me because the head of their tax department, they did a lot of tax work, called the government, wanted to know what lawyers may be available because most of the lawyers where I worked went into private practice and they were valuable commodities for tax practitioners at other firms because we had excellent training.
So what was your family life like then? Did you go back to Charleston to visit your...
Occasionally we'd go back, yeah. But, we moved to Chicago. We bought a little house, still there. I drive by it most times in Winnetka. My folks still lived in West Rogers Park. And it was quite nice.
So if you were living in Winnetka, they had to be paying you a reasonable amount of money when you moved here.
Yeah, but we didn't live a high life. I mean, when I started in private practice, I made $20,000 a year, which was fine. We lived very well. And even in the government, when I was making $13,000 a year or whatever number it was, we never deprived ourselves of anything. We went out, we did things, we took a vacation. It's amazing how well we lived on what I made. And Lynn earned somewhat. She wasn't a big earner, but she had to do modeling jobs and whatever. And our combined salaries, we lived very well.
All right, let's stop. Okay, Danny, let's go. All right, so now you're working for this law firm for 6 or 7 years, okay? Tell me what happened and how the law firm of Cat Muchin Zavitz really developed.
Alan Muchin and Jerry Reinsdorf were both in government with me. We always talked about, while we were in government, that we wanted to form a law firm together, the three of us, and build a law firm.
Was this in Wisconsin?
When I used to come into Chicago for weekends.
Yeah, and you would see them, okay.
We were all they were in the Chicago office because they're not from Chicago. I was in the Milwaukee office. We talked about it at length, and I said that would
They were friends of yours from college, right?
Pardon?
You knew them from Wisconsin?
No, Jerry Reinsdorf and I went to law school together. I
Okay.
knew Alan Muchin at college, but we weren't real friendly. I just knew who he was.
Okay,
I got friendly with him through the government.
okay.
So we said we were going to form our own law firm. I said, that's a great idea. We don't have any clients. This is while we're still in government. How are we going to pay rent? Anybody thought about that? No. So we all went to 3 different law firms. And after 6, 7 years, whatever it was, we said, because we all started building our own client base, we said, now it's time. And we did. We formed the law firm, and we started it June 1, 74. We had 9 lawyers. Today we have over 900 lawyers. We started it, and
Who were the original 9? You don't remember?
Michael Zavis, Jerry Gittles, Reinsdorf, Muchin, I, and a guy named Jerry Galler, I think. I'm not sure. And then the rest. Then what we did, we brought a couple of lawyers from each of our 3 firms because we were 3 different law firms. And then we started with the 9 lawyers. We knew from day one that we would be successful. However, we were 3 all the founding guys, 3 A-type personalities. The question was, could we live together? We knew we'd have no problems building the law firm if we didn't tear each other apart. One of the things we did, which I'm the beneficiary of today, we drafted a partnership agreement in June of 74 that said the named founding partners would have offices and secretaries for life. That's been the biggest boon for my existence because all my life I didn't know how to turn off my phone, okay? All my life I've had staff around me and a secretary.
So how did,
I couldn't do anything on my own.
how did the name end up?
I came because at my old law firm, I was in the middle of a big merger of one of my clients, and I couldn't leave at the time. Originally, it was Cat and Musins, Avis and Pearl, but I couldn't come over because I had to finish this deal because it'd be too disruptive. And then the other two guys, even though they weren't real factors, they put their name in. How it all happened, I'm not sure, because I was still at Gottlieb and Schwartz at the time. I came about a month or two after the formation of the firm.
Were you ever upset that your name wasn't in
It wasn't the firm.
I mean, but it was in the firm. How did it?
Well, because I came later, so it just tacked on to the middle rather than the front. But it was I was never impressed with that.
So
It was
so-
not important to me.
So during those early years, it must have been very heady and exciting. Let's talk a
The
little
answer
bit
is
about
yes. It was. We were thought of as a very aggressive group, and we were. And we,
it. Aggressive in what sense?
in getting new clients, bringing lawyers in from other firms, and it built. And we worked hard, and we went from 9 lawyers to 26 to 112, and whatever it may be. And we acquired pockets of lawyers from other firms, like a real estate practice, a litigation practice, or whatever. And we built it, and now the firm's all over the world.
So what's happening at home now? Tell me about you're having more children.
We then moved to Glencoe right about the same time. And we had a beautiful home in Glencoe on 2 acres of land in Hubbard Woods area. And we still go by the house from time to time now. But I was working long hours. In fact, I used to take the train down. I couldn't take the train anymore because I remember sitting in meetings and I'd be looking at my watch. Oh, I missed the 5:30 train. Maybe I can get the 7:30 train. And then I'd just start driving. And I did that all the years, and I traveled a lot. We had a big group of outstanding lawyers, and I had a big base of clients that were national and international. I traveled a lot, and that's why I think I mentioned my kids to this day tease me that because I was talking about my grandchildren, that you didn't even know who we were till we were 13 years old.
Where was your other son and your daughter born? In Chicago?
Where was what?
Your first son was
Born in Milwaukee, and our next 2 kids are born here. And and it worked out great. We had a great house. We had a baseball diamond in the backyard. We barbecued. The great American dream.
Did you take family vacations?
Always, yes. There were times over Christmas vacation where they'd go because at that time most of the deals had to close by 12/31, and many times I'd have to come later on because I couldn't leave the deal. I had to close the deal before I could join them, and that happened more than once, believe me.
It must have been tough on you, and
It was,
tough on you.
yeah, but I thrived on it.
You thrived. But your children never went into the law practice.
No, they saw how hard and tough it was, just my travel schedule and my unavailability to the family during those periods of time. And they always said, we don't want to be lawyers. It's too much work, too hard, too whatever. And I was glad they didn't.
This is a tough question to answer, but what do you think made you so successful in dealing with clients, and et cetera?
I thought a lot about that over the years. In my practice with my big clients, I had a lot of small clients that I just delved out within the law firm, but big clients, I was more than a lawyer. I mean, I prided myself on learning their business and getting involved with decision making in their business, not in a legal sense, but in a business sense. So consequently, using the combination of my lawyer skills, whatever they were, and business acumen, I became a valuable part of management, if you will, as it went forward. And that's and getting back to problem solving. And I mean, I prided myself on that.
So now you're working, you're in the law firm's building. Are you enjoying yourself?
Yeah, it was a lot of work, but that's when something happened, and I'm getting into the picture business now. One of my colleagues in the Treasury Department became general counsel of Columbia Pictures. When I was in Washington, I was writing regulations on what they call off-balance sheet financing. He now is in New York at Columbia Pictures, who's going broke. He calls me and says, and I'm in
Columbia Pictures is going broke. Is that what you said?
Columbia Pictures is.
Yeah.
They couldn't raise money off their balance sheet, and they needed money to make movies. So he called me, and now I'm in Chicago with my law firm, and says, I remember when you were writing the regulations on this area that could prove very fruitful for us at Columbia. Why don't you come to New York? So I came to New York and spent, weeks in and out, developing and structuring a way for them, Columbia, to finance pictures without the use of their balance sheet. And it was tax-driven in dealing with big banks and companies all over the world. However, I used to, and they had a studio there in New York too, and I used to go, because sometimes I'd meet some executives there, and I'd kind of watch the movie business happening. And I used to sit around, and I said, this looks like a lot more interesting and more fun than practicing law. So little by little, to make a very long, complicated story short.
Well, no, take us through the...
Well, I decided I wanted to get involved in the movie business, in the finance side of the movie business. So what I then did is I still had my big clients, because those I was wedded to. But I started spending time putting together financings for small independent movies. And little by little, I ultimately got out of the legal business, even though I had my office and secretary. I still did some stuff, but spent most of my time in Hollywood, commuting, because I never wanted to move my family to Hollywood, to Los Angeles. So I would commute, and then, jump ahead, that's when I was financing movies with outside financing sources. And then I decided that I wanted to produce movies myself. And I had a little small company with a couple of very good Hollywood producers that I became friends with. And I used to travel a lot. I'd commute to Hollywood. And when I'm making a picture, I'd rent a house. And I rented houses all over, depending where I was shooting. And then ultimately, I made a picture in Santa Barbara. Lynn and I were looking for a winter place to go. I came out there, and I was in pre-production, I think, and the production company rented a house for me. And I called Lynn, and I said, you got to come out here. This is really a cool place. So she came out. Then we rented houses there for about 3 or 4 years in different areas of Santa Barbara. And I had a concept that when I buy a house, I wanted to feel that when I was leaving Chicago, I was going to a resort, not just a house on the street. And sure enough, I found it, and the rest is history. And close enough to LA, where our kids come up a lot. They bring their friends up a lot, and it's a party at our house all the time.
So you basically left Cat Muchin?
No, I was always there. because I had my office and my secretary, and she ran my whole life. So I did take my name out of the firm when I went into the movie business, because Michael Zavis, Alamution, and I ran the law firm for a number of years. Mm-hmm. Then I got more involved in the movie business. I started extricating myself in the firm, other than a few clients that I had to be with.
Were they upset, or was it they didn't care? What?
No, we were all close friends, so whatever I wanted to do was fine. It was never an issue.
So you enjoyed the movie. What were some of the movies you were involved in?
I had an unusual situation. When I first got in the movie business, the movie video business was just starting. This is like mid-'80s, early 80s. So we would make a movie for $2 million, small movies, and the video license covered 90% of the cost of the picture before I got started. I used to go to Cannes or American Film Market or Milan for the film markets with a one-sheet, which is a big poster and a script, and sell the entire movie off the poster and the script.
Wow.
So we were profitable from day one. And I made a lot of small movies. Then I became partners with Dino De Laurentiis, who was a big shot Hollywood producer. I made a number of movies with him. And then the guy in Santa Barbara had just come off of The Fugitive, and he and I became partners, and that's how I got to Santa Barbara.
But just what? Give me a couple names of movies that you were involved in.
The small movies you wouldn't know. I mean, I made a movie called. Hold on, what's the name of the movie?
Okay, it's not important.
I can't remember the name of it. I mean, we made it for about $4 million. It made $25 million.
Wow.
Two Moon Junction, that was the name of the movie. And I took it to Cannes. And we were selling the foreign rights at Cannes. I remember we were at the Carlton Hotel. I got off the elevator, and they have those big foyers on every floor there. You couldn't get off the elevator. It was so crowded. I said, what's the crowd here for? Well, there's a movie they're selling, the hottest movie in Cannes, called Two Moon Junction. Sounds good to me. I went around the back way into the office and said, what's going on? They said they're bidding, every territory is bidding for the movie. With that, my partner and I got in a rented car, and we went to Italy, to wherever it was, in Italy for lunch, because we said, we just hit the jackpot. So I've made a lot of movies, none of them, even with De Laurentiis, they were big stars, but they weren't big movies. But it was a great time. I loved it. And I'm getting ready, as we speak here today, to make another movie. I haven't made a movie in, 1997 was my last.
So, when you look back on your life, okay, what did you enjoy more, building your law practice or the movie business, or is it a combination?
I
of
loved
both?
all of it. It's with my opening comment, I'm the luckiest guy in America. I loved everything I did. I have a wonderful family. My wife has been a great partner for 57 years, mind you. I have wonderful kids and grandkids, and I'm lucky. I'm plain, simple lucky, because I don't know of anybody, I'm sure there's thousands and thousands of people who've had such a good life as I've had. And everything's turned out well. I mean, financially, I have more money than I can spend in 10 lifetimes. My kids will inherit a lot of money. I made money in the film business. I made money in the investment business, the law business. So I've been lucky.
Well, I can say this because I know you, but your character is one of real substance.
Thank you. That's nice to hear, and I feel strongly about it, and that comes from what we talked earlier, from my family. It's a family thing, and I hope and I do believe that my children and grandchildren would wrap their arms around some of that same stuff that makes up character.
You know, I don't normally editorialize during this, but I don't know anybody who knows Mel Pearl that doesn't hold you in the highest regard.
Thank you. That's very nice to hear. That's very nice to hear.
So as we come to the end of this, is there anything you want to say to future generations as they watch this and hear about your life and how it unfolds, and how it...
That's a good question. Well, hopefully, once we get this video all done, it'll pass, of course, to my children and my grandchildren, their children, etc., through the whole progeny of the Pearl/Slater family. And I'll tell you, I've watched what I've seen thus far in my children and grandchildren, and they're good people. Good people. They know right from wrong. They know values in life. They have high moral character. And if that could be passed through the generations, I'll rest in peace.
It's very nice. Okay,
It's a wrap.
it's a wrap.